Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today we are going to talk about philosophical foundations of social sciences. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Professor M.P. Singh. Professor M.P. Singh is a retired professor from Faculty of Arts, Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Singh to our studios and request him to start the lecture. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Amritpal. Social sciences are supposed to be somewhat different from natural sciences. They are also supposed to be different from humanities or literature. These are different modes of knowledge or cognition, and our concern is with social sciences, which is located somewhere between humanities and literature on the one hand and social sciences, natural sciences, on the other. Now, research methodology has become a major concern in social sciences over the years. Not only in India but also in the West. Now, a good research methodology course comprises philosophical and logical foundations, number one. Then it should concern with macro theoretical foundations, if not micro, because going into the micro will take a lot of time and disciplines are so varied, but macro theoretical perspectives in social sciences, that would be part two, and some measure of or some methods of research, or methods of data collection and techniques of analysis, including statistical analysis. Our concern today is only with the philosophical foundations, the first part. And I will try to discuss briefly at least four philosophical perspectives that have greatly influenced the social sciences. These are positivism and neo-positivism, post-positivism or post-empiricism, number two. Number three, hermeneutics or interpretative sciences, and number four, critical philosophy or critical theory. There is some degree of continuity between philosophy and theory, but still for analytical purposes it would be good to make some demarcation between the two. Now, positivism is the earliest school in modern social sciences. Positivism is a close kin of empiricism. Now, what are its postulates? Positivism postulates or believes that to acquire valid and reliable knowledge is to go by data of experience and shun or avoid a priori metaphysical, mystical, imaginative thoughts and knowledge. So, the emphasis of positivism is that the sense experience is the most reliable mode of knowledge, acquiring knowledge, and it cannot be a priori, that is, a priori is something before observation. You cannot assume a priori, and you should go by observation, direct observation of the phenomenon you want to study. So, it's a basic premise of positivism. We will very briefly comment on some major positivist philosophers. The first name in this context comes that of Auguste Comte. Auguste Comte wrote mostly in the 19th century. He was a French sociologist and philosopher, and he is supposed to be the first modern positivist and also the one who coined the term positivism for the first time. Now, to get an idea of what kind of theorization or philosophization Comte makes, he formulated a theory of history that claims that human society and culture developed through three major stages of evolution. What are these three major stages of evolution? The first is what he calls theological, the second metaphysical, and the third positivist, the perspective that he himself advocated. Now, by theological perspective, Comte meant that it's a mode of acquiring knowledge or no mode of believing or perceiving through divine will or forces. So, theological perspective attributes causation to divine will or forces. If something happens in the world, if something happens in the world, if something happens in the world of experience, it is because God so willed. So, there is a divine agency or divine force that causes what happens. This perspective Auguste Comte called theological. The second perspective is metaphysical. By metaphysical perspective, Comte meant that this mode of philosophizing or this mode of cognition or this mode of acquiring knowledge attributes effects to abstract and speculative causes. If something happens, the causation is attributed to some abstract force, some natural force, not necessarily divine force. It's a force of nature that causes it. For example, Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, argued that in a roof, the beam holds the ceiling. The beam on which the ceiling rests, the roof rests, why does it hold the roof? Aristotle explained that it is in the nature of the beam to hold it. So, he is speculating in abstract term that something is happening because it is its nature, because it is its nature to do it. Or so this mode of explanation is called metaphysical by him. Now, the particular perspective that Auguste Comte himself advocated was the positivist perspective, the positivist philosophy. And in positivist philosophy, human beings understand scientific laws that control the world. If something happens, a scientific law is invoked, a scientific law is discovered. If any phenomenon of nature occurs, for example, the tsunami has become quite frequent. Typhoons or tsunamis or storms have become quite frequent, and scientific theories relating to global warming attribute it to this phenomenon of the phenomenon of global warming is causing the effect. So, this positivist mode of philosophy, the positivist philosophy attributes effects to causes that are discovered or that are explained through scientific laws. Now, remember, positivist philosophy emerged in the wake of the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, 18th century Enlightenment, and Auguste Comte himself was writing after the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution produced by Galileo, Kepler, Copernicus, Newton, and so scientific revolution had already taken place, and as a result of the scientific revolution, the world of literature, the world of human thought had become quite enlightened, quite illuminated, and the age of enlightenment, the 18th century, in the wake of scientific revolution in the 15th and 16th and 17th century, the enlightenment, the age of enlightenment is attributed to the 18th century. Scientific revolution occurred in the preceding 2-3 centuries. So, because positivist philosophers were formulating their philosophies in the aftermath of the scientific revolution and the enlightenment, this is the context in which their philosophy must be understood. And I discussed Auguste Comte at some, although his philosophy is quite elaborate and complex, he wrote 6 voluminous books on, philosophy and sociology. But to get an idea of his thought, to get an idea of his philosophy, I thought that we should discuss at some length at least some of the basic ideas that he formulated. Now, to mention a few other positivists, in Britain, Sir Francis Bacon is also a positivist philosopher, and Sir Francis Bacon also flourished after the scientific revolution, and among the British philosophers he is an early positivist, and he believed in empirical, inductive, experimental approach to acquiring knowledge. He was not a natural scientist, he was not a physicist, he was actually educated in what we call social sciences and law, and he was a practical statesman, a member of parliament. But he was greatly influenced by the success of science, and he developed his own notion of the scientific method. And he wrote a book called Novum Organum. Novum Organum. Those days, British philosophers mostly wrote in Latin, not in English. So, Novum Organum is a book written in Latin. Novum Organum literally means the new method. And in the new method, the new scientific method that Bacon glorified is supposed to be the inductive method. There are 2 modes of logical inference, induction and deduction, inductive and deductive. Induction by enumeration, you acquire knowledge by observing case after case, hundreds of cases, thousands of cases. Induction by enumeration, that's inductive mode of reasoning. Deductive inference is you assume that something is true. If this is true, then it follows necessarily as a consequence of it. If A, then B. And if you deductively assume that this is the case and then make an inference, that is, you don't make observation to begin with. You speculate, you imagine and assume, and then on the basis of your assumption, you make some logical inference, like for example, man is mortal, X is a man, so X is mortal. Now, this is an example of deduction. Now, Sir Francis Bacon did not believe in deductive method. He thought that deductive method is not scientific. It is unscientific, less scientific, and he thought that the induction by enumeration, observing case after case and then coming to a conclusion, that is the true scientific method. We will later see that this is actually a very narrow and partial view of scientific method. Scientific method really includes both induction as well as deduction. In combination, they are used in actual practice of science. But in any case, being an early enthusiast of scientific method, Sir Francis Bacon misconstrued and irrationally gave greater emphasis on logic of induction or inductive method. Now, some other British political philosophers or thinkers to name in this tradition are John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham and other British utilitarians. John Stuart Mill is a well-known liberal democratic theorist, and Sir Jeremy Bentham and utilitarian thinkers are also quite well known among students of history and political theory, political science. They are also counted as positivist philosophers, or they also believed in positivist perspective. Now, here it may be also pointed out that some more perceptive, perceptive, precautious philosophers realized the limitations of inductive method right at this stage, right at the early stage. David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, is among the early philosophers who had an inkling of limitations of inductive method, and which was considered the method of science. But David Hume was an empiricist or a positivist, as well as a believer in a skepticism, a skeptic philosophy. Skepticism was also a part of his philosophical outlook, and therefore he was more perceptive in realizing precautiously some of the emphasis in scientific method that were made much later by others. Now, what are some of the other principles of positivism? Another important tenet or principle in positivist philosophy is that it believes in the unity of sciences. Unity of sciences. Positivists believe that all sciences, irrespective of their subject matter, are an unified science, unity of sciences, unified science. For example, they would say that the subject matter of physics and politics are different, but their methods must be common. Their methods are common. In fact, they would insist that their method should be common. So, subject matter of politics may be different from physics, is different from physics, but positivism believed that the logic and methods in these two different sciences must be common. And this was an assertion that positivists made. They were fascinated because they were fascinated by the success of natural sciences. The astronomy was the most successful science, or it continues to be the most successful science until today, astronomy. And they noticed, for example, in the theories of Sir Isaac Newton, for example, in physics, astronomy, that theories of astronomy can never go wrong. You know, the theoretical structure of theories of astronomy are something like this. If you have all information about the state of the solar system at time t, then you can make prediction about any future state of the solar system with perfect predictive success, or you can make post-diction about any past state of the solar system, again with perfect predictive success. No prediction in astronomy about, say, lunar eclipse or solar eclipse goes wrong. So they were fascinated by the success of natural sciences, particularly astronomy, and early positivists believed that if social sciences, where theories are very imprecise and predictions seldom go true, predictions often go wrong. So, but the early positivists believed that if the method of natural sciences are followed in social sciences would also become as perfect, quote unquote, as perfect as natural sciences. So, unity of sciences is another important principle or tenet of positivist philosophy. Now, very briefly we have, although there is a lot to discuss in positivism, but at least we have been able to get some idea about what positivist philosophers believed in. Now, a new, not entirely new, but a new emphasis, a new orientation in positivism appeared sometime later. And this is not anti-positivist, or this is not a school beyond positivism. It is part of positivism, but there are some new points or new emphasis or new departures within the same school. Now, this new orientation in positivism came to be called logical positivism. Earlier we were talking about positivism. Now, it came to be called logical positivism. And logical positivism is also called Vienna Circle or Berlin Circle. Vienna in Austria, Berlin in Germany, both Germanic countries. So, Vienna Circle and Berlin Circle of philosophers also became influenced by positivism. So, you see that the earliest positivists were either French or British, Now, positivism is traveling to another country, Germany. German philosophers are also becoming influenced by positivism, and their positivist ideas came to be called logical positivism. How does it differ from the earlier positivist perspective? Now, this new perspective differs from the earlier ones in the sense that this new perspective became much more self-conscious, much more emphatic about systematic methodology, systematic methods of scientific research or systematic method for acquiring knowledge. The earlier positivists had generally emphasized that a personal experience, sense perception, knowledge acquired through sense perception, but individual was generally the focus of the earlier school. Now, the neo-positivists expanded their vision and said that knowledge acquired by one person through his or her sense perception or observation is not enough. It should also be corroborated by other persons. So, any knowledge should be socially corroborated. Any knowledge should be collectively endorsed. It is not only X that should come to the same conclusion through an observation. It is Y, X, Y, Z. Every observer, every scientific observer who makes a study should come to the same conclusion. So, instead of personal experience, they emphasized a more systematic, self-consciously method, and emphasis shifted from interpersonal validity of knowledge rather than just self-satisfying positivist knowledge acquired by an individual. Now, they also differ from Comte and Mill, another point. They also differ from earlier positivists in holding that metaphysical doctrines are not false but meaningless. Earlier positivists had said that metaphysical doctrines are false because they are imaginative, they are not they don't correspond to direct observation or experience. But later positivists said that metaphysical doctrines are also they also have some existence, or they also have some role in knowledge, and they are also some kind of knowledge, but they are not false. They may be meaningless to a positivist, because to a positivist they do not make sense. So, they may be meaningless, but they are not false, and in this sense the positivists were willing to accept, they were leaving some room for, say, mysticism, mystical experience, poetic experience, psychic experience, which experiences may not be corroborated by inductive method or direct observation method, but one cannot say that they are false. They may be meaningless to the positivists, but they are not false. So, this is the way that the Vienna Circle of Philosophers or the Berlin Circle of Philosophers developed the positivist perspective in a new direction, which came to be called logical positivism. Now, logical positivists also made a number of other formulations. Let me first mention a few names here. Vienna Circle included German philosophers like Moritz Schlick, Rudolf Carnap, and the Berlin Circle of Philosophers was led by Hans Reichenbach. So, Vienna Circle and Berlin Circle of Philosophers, they are called neo-positivists, and some of the important points that they made may be very briefly discussed here. Now, these philosophers made an analytic-synthetic distinction. They said that there is a gap between analytical knowledge and synthetic knowledge. analytical knowledge is purely logical knowledge. Analytical knowledge is purely logical knowledge. Like for instance, 2 plus 2 makes 4. It's an example of analytical knowledge. 2 doesn't refer to any real object in the world. It's an empty concept, so to say. When suppose I ask you, go to the library and bring 1, it doesn't make sense to you. But if I say, go to the library and bring 1 book, so 1 book, when the logical meaning of 1 is combined with a physical object in the real world, book, it becomes a synthetic knowledge. And logical knowledge, pure logical knowledge is something which doesn't really refer to a particular object, but it's a mathematical concept, it's a geometrical concept, not necessarily referring to a particular object in the world of real experience. So they made analytic synthetic distinction, and extending this very distinction, they made a distinction between observation and theory, and they said that there is a gap between observation and a theory. There is always a gap between an observation and a theory, and no observation fully corroborates a theory. A theory is always beyond any concrete observation. No concrete observation can fully comprehend or fully encompass a particular theory. So a theory is always a larger space. Theory is always a larger space than any observation of concrete aspect of that phenomenon that you make. So they made a distinction. They also theorized about observation theory gap, extending their analytic synthetic gap. They also made assertions about observation being always less than a full theory. They also made a difference between the context of discovery and context of verification. This distinction is particularly made by Hans Reichenbach, the leader of the Berlin Circle of Philosophers. Hans Reichenbach made that as a scientist is only concerned with the context of verification, not with the context of discovery. To illustrate this point, let me refer to the Indian mathematical genius Srinivas Ramanujan. Srinivas Ramanujan always claimed, as you know, he was a great mathematician, one of the top-notch mathematicians of his time in the world, and he always claimed that goddess of Namakkal in Tamil Nadu, he was from Tamil Nadu, and he was taken to Cambridge by a British mathematician who was greatly influenced by him. He was not highly educated, Ramanujan was not highly educated, but he somehow, he was a gifted mathematician, so to say, and he claimed that goddess of Namakkal came to him in dreams and gave him mathematical formulas, and on waking up he found them true. He tried to verify them and found them true. Now Hans Reichenbach would say that we are not at all concerned with the context of discovery of Ramanujan's mathematics, whether a goddess came and gave it to him or whether he himself intellectually developed it. We are not concerned about that. We are only concerned about the verification part, verification of his mathematical formulas and they are being found true. So, the logical positivists made a distinction between context of discovery and context of verification. To make a few more comments on it, context of discovery and context of verification lead to two different branches of sciences or knowledge. Context of discovery has also become a subject of philosophical discourse, and context of discovery has led to a new discipline, what is called sociology of science. Sociology of science. And context of verification, of course, belongs to the realm of philosophy of science or logic of science. Now, for example, philosophy of science, philosophy of science is context of verification. Sociology of science, for example, says, Marx, for example, says that a person's political beliefs, ideologies, values, beliefs are shaped or conditioned by one's class status. Working class leads to working class consciousness, and a theory of history based on working class consciousness, according to Marx, was scientific theory of history. And political consciousness of other classes were decried as false consciousness or not true scientific basis of philosophy of history. So, context of discovery has led to a new branch of philosophy called sociology of science, and context of verification, of course, is what we are dealing with, philosophy of science. Now, post-positivism. Now, we have reached a new point where we encounter philosophers who begin to question, who begin to reject many assumptions of positivism. And here, and that is why we have called it post-positivism, not neo-positivism, but post-positivism. New departures in positivism were called neo-positivism, but this we have called post-positivism because post-positivist philosophers have questioned many foundational assumptions of positivism and have asserted or have accepted non-positivist postulates, non-positivist positions they have taken, and that is why we have called it post-positivism or post-empiricism. Positivism, as you will recall, emphasizes or privileges empiricist knowledge, empirical research, field-based research, experience-based research, experiment-based research. I have used both the terms, post-positivism and post-empiricism. Now, these new philosophers have gone beyond many assumptions of positivism, including privileged position of empiricism. Now, post-positivists have questioned many of the assumptions of positivism. Now, because of the limitations of time, let us try to cover as much field as we can within the given time span. Post-positivists, what are their major positions? Post-positivists say that what is their image of science? The image of science of positivists was the school that we have just discussed. Image of science in positivism was that science presents one real unique picture of the world, and one real unique picture of the world. Now, this belief of positivism has come to be questioned by post-positivist philosophers of science. And post-positivists assert that instead of presenting one unique picture of reality, sciences present alternative interpretations, and sometimes it may be difficult to decisively reject one over the other. So, post-positivists are willing to accept that science can present alternative explanations, alternative pictures of reality, and at times it is very difficult to reject one interpretation over the others, at least totally. At least totally they cannot be rejected. Now, let me illustrate it with a point, because it may be very abstract. When Gregorian calendar came, the calendar that we use today, most of the world today uses the Gregorian calendar. When Gregorian calendar came, it replaced many calendars that were used in the world beforehand, before that period. Before that, the Egyptian scientists Tycho Brahe and Ptolemy and Tycho Brahe had developed a calendar which was being used before scientific revolution of Galileo, Kepler, Newton proved that that calendar was wrong. But that calendar was being used for centuries before Galileo, Kepler and Newton, and that was the basis of life of centuries of people. And in our own country, there are several calendars being used, and one Indian calendar, the Islamic calendar, the Hindu calendar, and among the Shak Sambat calendar, Vikram Sambat calendar, these all calendars are being used, and they give a picture of the world, they give a picture of the time, changing time, which are basis of lives of people for centuries. One difference, for example, one Indian calendar which is based on the moon, the lunar calendar. After a few years, there is a distortion of a month. There is a distortion of a month in this Indian calendar based on the moon. And after a few years, you will notice that people say that there is a Malmas. This year there would be 2 Maghs instead of 1. So, so that distortion is removed by accepting a month within a year twice. In Gregorian calendar also there is a limited distortion. After 4 years in Gregorian calendar, there is a distortion of a day. In the leap year, February has 29 days instead of 2. 29 days instead of 28. So, distortion of 2 days and distortion of a month. In one lunar based calendar, there is a distortion of a month, and in the Gregorian calendar, which is used most widely in the world today, there is a distortion of a day. and that is normalized after 4 years in a leap year. So, this example illustrates that science presents alternative pictures of the world, and people do not always reject one theory totally, and even in Gregorian calendar there is a distortion of a day, and still most of the world is using it. So, post-positivists make this assumption. They reject the positivist view of realism of science and put forward their view that science does not present one unique picture of the world, one unique picture of reality. It may be alternate, it may present alternate pictures, and sometimes it may become difficult to say which theory is better over the other. So, this is obviously a very significant departure from the positivist philosophy that we discussed to begin with. Then the positivists had said that there is a clear demarcation between science and non-science. Science and non-science are clearly demarkable, clearly subject to differentiation. That was the belief of positivist philosophers of science. Post-positivists now assert that demarcation between science and non-science is a continuum rather than watertight compartment. It is a continuum rather than watertight compartments. And therefore, now it is possible to argue, and one physicist has in fact, Fritjof Capra, one American physicist, Fritjof Capra, in a book called Tao of Physics, has made bold to assert that Eastern mysticism is as developed a science as Western science. Western science and Eastern mysticism, there are different modes of cognition, different modes of acquiring knowledge, beliefs, values, and therefore, post-positivists say that the watertight compartment or complete demarcation between science and non-science that was made by the positivists is not acceptable, not fully tenable. And different sciences, I had an experience of attending a workshop in Nainital. It was a regional conference organized by the Forum of Federations Ottawa. The Forum of Federations Ottawa sponsors research on federal countries, federalism. And this workshop there was on ecological federalism, environmental federalism, and there was a team from TERI, the Energy Research Institute, New Delhi, which is a university now, and there was a local environmentalist, ecologist, Chandi Prasad Bhatt, who has done very significant work in environmental protection and ecological protection in Uttarakhand regions, villages and towns. And listening to the team from TERI and listening to Chandi Prasad Bhatt, a village-based ecologist and well-trained ecologists from TERI, New Delhi, was a wonderful experience. And therefore, anyone who says that Chandi Prasad Bhatt his ecology is unscientific, I just after attending that workshop, I would never say that. And it was a fascinating experience. I particularly recall this experience to illustrate this point. Then a third principle of post-positivism is that science always does not progress cumulatively and unilinearly. It progresses in fits and starts, breakdowns and reconstructions. The positivist view of science is that science always progresses unilinearly. There is always a progression in science, and earlier scientific knowledge provides as the basis on which later scientific research accumulate new knowledge. Now, this is a common sense view of science that we have also acquired in our schools and colleges. But post-positivists say that science is not such science doesn't always have that kind of trajectory that always progresses up and up and up. This view is particularly argued by an American physicist turned philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn. Thomas Kuhn is an American philosopher of science whose book, The Structure of Scientific Knowledge, is one of the perhaps the world's most widely read book in philosophy of science today. Now, Thomas Kuhn in that book, A Structure of Scientific Revolutions, argues that he presents a picture of a scientific discipline, how a scientific discipline progresses from one stage to another. And if you look at this diagram on the screen, Thomas Kuhn's cycle of scientific progress is presented here. Thomas Kuhn's beginning point is pre-science, when science is without a paradigm. Pre-science, a phase in a scientific discipline which may be called pre-scientific, that is the beginning of science in a particular field of knowledge. Pre-science, when there is no paradigm, consensually accepted paradigm by the community of sciences as the basis of their theorization or as the basis of their research. If there is no commonly accepted theoretical framework in a discipline and people just start doing scientific research, that is the pre-scientific phase, and there is no paradigm or no well accepted theoretical framework or approach or paradigm. There is a difference between a theory and a paradigm. Paradigm is much wider than a theory, and if you read the book, you will come to appreciate the difference between the two. For the sake of the present argument, let us say that pre-scientific phase is without a paradigm of research, without a paradigm of theory. The next phase is when a paradigm emerges in that discipline and members of the scientific community consensually or universally accept that as the basis of research. A particular, like for instance, when the theories of Ptolemy and Tycho Brahe came to be questioned by Galileo and others, and finally Newton, and when Newton formulated his mechanics or his theory of the solar system, the earlier theory came to be rejected. So one paradigm that guided research in ancient Egypt went under, and a new paradigm, Newtonian paradigm, emerged that became the basis of modern scientific research. So, that is when a discipline becomes a normal science, when a paradigm comes to be accepted by the members of the scientific community. So, what does this example illustrate? It's not, science is not a cumulative progression of knowledge. That foundation of knowledge is created and it always goes up and up and up. In fact, scientific progress moves through fits and starts, breakdowns and reconstruction, and one paradigm may be rejected, another paradigm may be accepted. Later, as you go on reading this diagram of Kuhn's cycle, you will find that the first stage was, as I just discussed, pre-science, then normal science, then when a new paradigm also gradually later on comes to be questioned and that faces crisis, then that paradigm is rejected, then a third paradigm may become. A phase of crisis is the phase of critical science, and when again a third or fourth or fifth paradigm gradually as science goes on comes to be accepted, a scientific discipline or growth of scientific knowledge moves in that fashion in the history of science. So, Thomas Kuhn and Karl Popper, the British philosopher of science Karl Popper and the American philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn, are in contemporary philosophy of science the two towering figures whose post-positivist philosophies of science are subject of great debate going on in the discipline of philosophy of science.
I would have to very regrettably stop this conversation here, because as we can see, there's a lot to be discussed even in social and philosophical foundations of social sciences. On that note, I would like to thank sir for this very illustrating discussion on philosophical discussions on social sciences, and I would like to thank you, dear friends, for watching our show. Stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you.